Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Kiddushin. This is our 6th class, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 39 to 45. Okay, Daf 39 we left off last week speaking about the mitzvot, the commandments that have to do with living in Israel and the land in Israel. We were talking about Orla. Orla is that a fruit tree, the first 3 years you cannot eat its fruit. And we were talking about kilayim. Kilayim is when you plant different species in the same field. When the Torah talks about kilayim, it actually means a vineyard, meaning grapes and grain. Those are the two things that cannot be planted together. So the Gemara tells us that that these two things do apply outside of Israel, even though all other mitzvot that apply to the land only apply in Israel. And it is a tradition from Sinai, meaning in Hebrew we say halacha leMoshe miSinai. It was a tradition that these apply outside of Israel. And if you're not sure, meaning if there's a doubt outside of Israel, so then it's permitted to eat it. But if it's real, you're not allowed to, meaning it is forbidden. As we said, kilayim, the mixing of species in a vineyard, meaning a vineyard plus a grain plus wheat, outside of Israel is only rabbinic in nature. But if you graft two trees together, that is real biblical kilayim, and that is forbidden even outside of Israel. Same thing with animals as well. If seeds are planted together outside of Israel, this is not forbidden, whereas in Israel, it would be forbidden. And as we said, kilayim, meaning planting two different species in a vineyard in Israel, is not only forbidden, but forbidden to eat or forbidden to plant, but it's also forbidden to get any benefit from whatever grows in that area. The Gemara tells us that even in Bavel, in Babylonia, Rav was careful to plant his vegetables separately. And this seems to be a proof that kilayim does apply outside of Israel. Again, Babylonia is outside of Israel. And the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Maybe he just did it because it looked nice, or maybe it was easier to harvest that way, but not because he was being specifically careful about kilayim. The Gemara continues. So now the Mishnah on Daf 39 tells us, and it's actually fascinating that this daf was right before Yom Kippur. And the Mishnah tells us that if you do one mitzvah, then if you do one commandment, so then goodness will come to you, and you'll get long life, and you'll inherit the land. And if you don't do a mitzvah, then you don't get all of these things. So the Gemara quotes a very famous idea. It says that there are things that you get benefit for in this world and in the next world. And it gives a whole list. This is actually part of our morning prayers. We say this Mishnah from Peah, and it gives a list of all the things that we get benefit, that we get long life for. And it seems to be a very specific list. So the Gemara is asking, how does our Mishnah not give a specific list? It says, if you do one good deed, you get long life. But the other Mishnah says, no, it's specific things. Right? The list of things are honoring your parents, doing good deeds to other people, what we say, gmilut chasadim, hachnasat orchim, right? Inviting people into our homes. If you try to make peace between different people, and if you learn Torah, That's the list of good deeds that give you long life. So our Mishnah says any mitzvah. So the Gemara says, no, if you do one mitzvah more than your merits, right? If you remember, as we went into Yom Kippur, many of the prayers talk about our sins versus our merits, right? The good things that we've done versus the bad things that we've done. So the Gemara says that if it's equal and you do one extra good deed, so then it's as if you've done all the good deeds and you get benefit. And again, if you have equal merit and sins, right? So then if it's one of these lists, one of these 6 things, so it'll put you over, right? And again, you will have benefit. If you have more merits than sins, so then the Gemara tells us that any punishment that you deserve for the sins that you did, you'll get it in this world, so that in the next world, all you'll get is reward. And the idea is that the reward is better to get in the world to come because it is an eternal reward. This is actually, this Gemara is actually I would say is used as an explanation why we look around our world and we see incredible people who are suffering. And many of us say, how could such good people suffer? So this Gemara is saying they're suffering now so that in the next world they won't have any suffering. For some people that explains things, for others it's still very difficult, but I think it's an interesting way of understanding reward and punishment. The Gemara tells us the opposite as well. If you have more sins than merits, so then you'll get your reward in this world and you'll get your punishment in the next. And from here, the Gemara gives a story. I think it's a famous story because there's a famous mitzvah in the Torah. It says it's called Shiluach Haken, which means that if you want to take a chick or an egg or baby bird, you need to shoo away the mother before you take the chick, right? It's a type of, it's compassionate, but the Torah says that you'll get long life if you do this. And it also says that if you honor your parents, you'll get a long life. The Gemara tells a story, a very sad story, of a child whose parents told them to do Shiluach Haken. So the child climbed on the ladder. They were listening to their parents. They were doing this mitzvah. And then the child falls off the ladder and dies. And it's a terrible story. But it's more than a terrible story because the Gemara says, wait a minute, these are the 2 mitzvot that God promises us long life. And this child does it. And where's the long life? So the Gemara says, we're misunderstanding what does it mean a long life? And the Gemara explains that a long life means a long life in the next world, not in this world. It shows that we get reward in the next world, and it's not about this world. Again, I think these are very difficult stories, and I think for many of us, it doesn't answer many theological and philosophical questions that we have, but it is a very important perspective. So the Gemara, another very important line that the Gemara, I mean, it's all important, but the Gemara says also, it's important to understand that if you think about doing a sin, you do not get punished. Meaning if you have intention to do a sin, but you don't do it, you do not get punished. You only get punished for actually doing a sin. And the opposite is not true. Meaning, if you think about doing a mitzvah, about doing a good deed, you actually get reward for thinking about doing it. Obviously, it's better to do it, but you even get rewarded for thinking about doing it. Another fundamental concept is that a person who is what's called a shaliach mitzvah, on their way or in the middle of doing a mitzvah, So then nothing bad is going to happen to that person. This is why many people, when they go to travel, someone might give them $1 and say, like, go give charity when you get to when you land. The idea is that it should protect you on your journey, because your journey is to go give charity. So that should protect you. The Gemara says, but this child was on his way to do the mitzvah. Why did he die? Right? You're saying that he is protected. The Gemara says, well, maybe he fell on the way down, so he already did the mitzvah, or maybe the ladder. I think this is also a fascinating idea. The Gemara says maybe the ladder was a broken ladder, and he shouldn't have been climbing on it in the first place. Right? When we have a hazard, we're not allowed to put ourselves in harm's way. Right? We can't rely on a miracle to save us. This is actually the story of the child. It was actually witnessed by Elisha ben Avuya. This is who we refer to in the Gemara as Acher. This was a student, a very wise person, but they saw this happen, and it actually broke his faith. And he said, like, I can't. It led him astray. And he left Judaism, and it's a very tragic story, and therefore we refer to him as Acher, right, the other. But it shows how powerful this story is, because it's just such a tragic story. Okay, the Gemara on Daf 40 gives us a story of another sage who runs away and doesn't sin. Right, he was put in a position where he could have sinned with a woman, with a non-Jewish woman who tried to seduce him, and he runs away. And the Gemara gives all these stories of sages with very strong wills, and they don't give in to seduction, and they overcome their desires, their evil inclinations. I think this is meant to give us some hope and inspiration to try to do the right thing, even when it's really hard. We mentioned the list of things that if you do these things, you get benefit in this world and the next world. So now the Gemara goes through each one. It talks about honoring your parents. It says that you will live long, again, in the next world, and it also says it'll be good for you. So the Gemara says not only will not only will you live long in the next world, but it will be good for you in this world as well. Meaning you get benefit in both worlds. The same thing with doing good deeds, gmilut chasadim. Again, it has the idea that it will give you life in the next world and be good for you in this world. The same thing with all the other ones. It goes through the verses to show how you get benefit in this world and in the next world. Now, it's interesting that this statement doesn't have the mitzvah of shiluach haken, meaning of sending away the bird. Why doesn't it mention that? So one explanation is that if something is, it seems that this is only good for the bird, or it's good for nature. So the Gemara says if something is good for God and good for people, if you do those things, meaning you do things that are good for other people, but also good in your relationship to God, that's called a good tzaddik, like a good righteous person. If you only do things that are good between you and God, but you're bad to people, that's called an evil tzaddik, like an evil righteous person, meaning it's not enough to only do one, you have to do both. It's important to understand that it's not only about our relationship to God, and it's not only about our relationship to people. We have to do both. Okay. And that Mishnah from Pe'ah says that there are peirot, meaning there are fruits to the actions that you do. What are these fruits? This is like the ripple effect, right? There are positive effects that doing good deeds have on the world, and the same thing with sins. If you do bad deeds, there's a ripple effect in the world as well. And this is a desecration of God's name. As we said before, if you think about doing a good deed, you're rewarded as if you did it. And if, right, again, but if, let's say, you had a bad thought and it did bring about some sort of effect in the world, so then that's like an action, and then there is punishment for that. The only exception about the thinking about bad things, that it doesn't count, in general, that's true, except for idolatry. If you have in mind to do idolatry, worshiping other gods, false gods, so then so then there is a punishment for that. The Gemara talks about, and again, it was very powerful to read this right before Yom Kippur. If we're talking about good deeds and bad deeds and merit and and sin, the Gemara tells us that once a person does a sin, then it feels like it's already permitted to him. It's not that it actually is permitted to him, but it feels okay, right? You do something once, you feel bad. You do something twice, lightning doesn't strike you, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess it's not so bad, and you think it's okay. And the Gemara tells us that it's interesting that I think the Gemara recognizes that people have desires, and it's hard. So the Gemara says that if you really need to sin, you have this great desire, it's better to do it in private so that it's not public, so that not everybody sees it. If, let's say, you can't control your desire, it's better to, dress in all black and go to another city and do it in private, meaning do it somewhere else where people don't know who you are. But this seems to be problematic because the Gemara says this implies that you're hiding from people, but not from God, right? If you can't control it, so then what are you supposed to do? So the Gemara says, listen, if you can control it, so then you shouldn't be doing it in private, and you shouldn't be doing, if you can control it, you shouldn't be hiding from anybody. But if you can't control it, so then you do need to kind of hide and do something privately if you can. The Gemara tells us that God extends credit to people for their sins. The question is, what does that mean? So it explains that we're not punished right away, right? But God gives us time to repent, to try to think about what we've done wrong. But if you do something that in Hebrew is called a chilul Hashem, that you're really desecrating the name of God, so then you are punished right away. That's not okay. The Gemara tells us that, again, very powerfully as we went into Yom Kippur. It talks about, but I think it's for the whole year. It talks about viewing ourselves as if we're 50-50, right? We went into the judgment day hoping that our merits were greater than our sins. But if you think of yourself as 50-50, then it means every good deed that we do is going to help us tip the scales. And I think it's a very powerful message, right? Many times we think, oh, what's oh, if I give a little, $1 here or $1 there to charity, what does that do in the grand scheme of things? And the Gemara says, no, every little thing that you do helps, right? So to think of ourselves as really in that balance, so that every little thing helps us right, helps tip the scale. And I think it's a very important message. Of course, the opposite is also true, right? One could say, oh, what's the big deal? I'll just say something not nice about a person. Oh, it's okay. It's not a big deal. No, if you're 50-50, it's going to tip the scales in the other way as well. So be very careful. In terms of judgment, the Gemara tells us that the world is judged as a majority of people, and a person is judged by the majority of their actions. So again, we are a sum of our parts when we're dealing with judgment. And the last thing on this topic, again, I think very famously, but very important to remember, right? The Gemara tells us that if a rasha, a person who is evil all of his life, but does tshuva, repents on the last day of his life, it is accepted, right? Meaning God is always waiting for us to do tshuva. There's no such thing as too late. And if a tzaddik, if a righteous person was righteous all their life, but rebels at the very end and regrets everything they've ever done, they lose all of that merit. So every act is powerful, and we should, be very careful with our actions. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 40 tells us that if you learn Torah and Mishnah and act appropriately, so then it will help prevent you from sinning. If not, so then you're not part of society, right? If you're not learning, if you're not acting appropriately, you're separating yourself. You're separating yourself from society. So the Gemara explains that righteous people, they're like a tree that's planted, that's rooted in a very pure place, and they have leaves that are, over an impure place. So, you cut off a few of those branches, those are seen as the suffering that we have in this world, and then what's left is a tree that's completely pure. But evil people are the opposite, right? They're rewarded now, and they're punished in the next world. Now the Gemara asks, I think, another very important question, right? Is it better to learn Torah or to do a good deed, right? Should you go out and do a mitzvah or should you learn Torah? And the Gemara says it's better to learn Torah because it leads to doing good deeds. And I think not everybody reads that sentence to the end, right? The answer isn't it's better to learn Torah, period. The answer is it's better to learn Torah so that you learn how to be a good person and do good deeds. And I always, I say this often, that it's important to recognize that, it's not enough. It's not enough to only do good deeds and not learn, and it's not enough to just learn and not do good deeds. So we have to do both of those things. Okay. And the Gemara, the chapter ends by telling us, right, that the world or a person is not judged for not learning Torah, but we are judged for our deeds, right? Meaning we get rewards for learning and we get rewards for doing mitzvot. And it's really important to do both of those things. And with that, we finished our first chapter. It's a very long chapter. And now we are going to begin the second chapter. So on Daf 41, the Mishnah tells us that a man can, betroth a woman himself or with an agent. A woman can accept Kiddushin herself or through an agent. If you remember, we just discussed this idea of an agent, a shaliach. You can appoint a shaliach, an agent, to either accept or to give Kiddushin. And finally, the Mishnah tells us that a father can accept Kiddushin for his daughter, or through an agent. And now the Gemara is going to explain what we've learned. So the Gemara says, it's a greater mitzvah if a man does it himself, rather than through an agent. Or another opinion is no, he can't use an agent if he can do it himself, right? So this is very interesting when we're talking about shlichut, when we're talking about agency. Is it better to do it yourself? Does it not matter? Or can you not do it through a messenger if you can do it on your own? And that's the machloket on this daf. The Gemara says no, the man should do it himself so he can see who he's marrying, right? Don't do it through the agent because you never know. And also it's better for the woman to accept it, Kiddushin, betrothal, for herself, but she could do it through an agent as well. As we know, a woman, and this is a line that we've seen before and we will see again, a woman always prefers to be married, and therefore maybe she's less picky, according to this Gemara. Right? A woman is would always prefer to be married than to be alone. Okay, the father shouldn't betroth his daughter when she is a minor, a ktana, meaning under 12, but he can do it when she's a na'ara. Na'ara is between 12 and 12 and a half. So when she's between 12 and 12 and a half, he can accept Kiddushin for her. Okay, let's talk about this concept of shlichut, of agency. So, right, it says vishalcha, a man sends away his wife. This teaches, but it uses the word shaliach, right? Shalcha, he sends her away. It teaches that you can use an agent to divorce his wife. You can also use an agent for marriage, right? For kiddushin. As we've seen before in the last Masechet and in this Masechet, betrothal or marriage is connected to divorce, and therefore, just as in divorce you can use an agent, so too you can do it for betrothal. The Gemara tells us you can also use an agent to separate truma, right? Truma is the gift that is given to the Kohanim, to the priests, and it needs to be done from your produce. From your harvest, you have to take off. So the agent has to take off what the owner would want. What's interesting about truma is it's not really a set amount. There's like being very generous, being regular, and being less generous. So you can give either 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th of the harvest. So if let's say the agent doesn't know what to do, he should try to think what would the owner want. So the verse teaches us that the shaliach can separate truma. It could also be done by thought, meaning you could say, oh, those, the wheat over there on the right side, that's going to be truma, even though you didn't physically separate it. So this is very unique to truma. And there's a special verse that teaches, again, that you can use an agent and that you can do it by thought. You can also, since we're talking about agency, the Gemara talks about other times we see this. We actually learned this in Masechet Psachim, that you can appoint an agent to slaughter the Korban Pesach, and other sacrifices in general, sacrifices are done through agency, right? The priest is our agent, the Gemara says all of these cases are important to have a verse for each one of them, because each one of them has a unique aspect. Again, truma and sacrifices, those can be done with thought. And the Gemara tells us that the agent needs to be Jewish. A non-Jewish slave cannot be an agent. However, a non-Jew can separate truma, and there's a special verse that teaches that he can't be an agent. Business partners cannot separate truma for each other. You have to do it yourself. Again, there's a special pasuk, a special verse that teaches that an agent, if you send someone to do it, they can do it for you. Daf 42 tells us that all of Israel can fulfill their obligation with one korban Pesach, with one sacrifice of the Pesach, even if they don't eat the meat. And again, this works through agency. Okay. The Gemara tells us also that the land was divided up. Eretz Israel, Israel was divided up also through agency. Each head of the tribe was an agent for the whole tribe. And the Gemara says no. It wasn't that they were an agent, but rather they were acquiring something for their entire tribe. Okay. From here, the Gemara talks about acquiring something for an orphan, because they're talking about doing something for the benefit of someone. If you do something for the benefit of someone, you can do it even without their consent. And the Gemara always talks about how do we define benefit, making sure that something is beneficial for them is very important to understand if something is beneficial for them or not. The Gemara at the bottom of Daf 42 teaches us that we were talking about shlichut, agency, that you can send people to do something for you. It's very important to understand. In Hebrew, the sentence is, in shlichut lidvar avera. There is no such thing as agency for a sin. Meaning, if you send someone to do a sin, that does not work. Meaning, they can't say, we were just following orders. It does not work in Judaism. The agent gets punished and not the sender, right? If I say, go kill so-and-so, and you go kill so-and-so, you killed so-and-so. So you get punished, and I don't, because I didn't kill anybody. But it's not good for me to do. But the point is that the person who does the killing is the one who gets punished. Interestingly enough, the only exception is with what's called me'ilah. We've learned this before. Me'ilah, not me'il like a coat, but me'ilah is when you misappropriate a sanctified item, right? Something that was set aside for God, for the temple. If you take that item for yourself, that's called me'ilah. I guess you can call it stealing from God. This is the only place where we see that if I send you to do it and you do exactly as I say, so then I, the sender, gets punished and not the agent. This is learned from a specific verse, and that is the exception to the rule. There's another exception to the rule, and that is a custodian. Beit Shammai say that a custodian is liable even if he thinks about misappropriating an object. This also seems to be unclear because we said thinking about something doesn't get you punished. Beit Hillel say no. But the Gemara then comes up with another case, Daf 43, that if someone steals an animal and then slaughters it or sells it, they are liable, even if it's done through an agent. So again, here we see that agency does work, and it's the sender that is punished and not the agent. Another case is where these are all, of course, exceptions to the rule that we just stated. A person is liable if they sacrifice an animal outside of the temple, again, but not the agent. And these are all exceptions to the rule, but the rule is still the case, meaning in general, if you send someone to do a sin, it is the agent that gets punished, and not the person who sends them. The Gemara talks about, again, I mentioned the case of sending someone to kill someone. it seems that the sender is liable, and not the agent. The Gemara talks about the case of David, of King David, who sends Bathsheba's husband Uriah to the battlefield, and he subsequently gets killed. And it's interesting because David is not the one who physically kills him, but he does get killed. The Gemara says, again, do we see David as being liable for this? If yes, then we see that the sender does get punished and not the agent. And then the Gemara says, no, as we said, it's the agent that is the one that gets punished. However, you are liable in the heavenly courts, meaning you obviously didn't do the right thing, but in the courts down here, you are not liable. The Gemara says, well, maybe David, King David, wasn't punished for Uriah's death, because he deserved it. He rebelled against the king. He didn't listen to David when he told him to go home, and therefore he was not punished. There's a machloket if the agent can also be a witness to the act. Again, right? If you send an agent to go do something, go and betroth this woman for me, can that agent now come and say, oh, I witnessed that she was betrothed because I was the one who did it? So the Gemara says, on one hand, it's very strong because the actual person who did it is the one who's testifying about it. Or no, the agent is like the sender, right? Again, there's another statement, right? Shlucho shel adam kmoto. If you send an agent, they're an extension of you. And if they're an extension of the person who sends, right? If they're an extension of you, so then you can't testify about something that's about you. So therefore, the agent, as an extension of the sender, cannot be a witness. That was a lot of words, but that's basically the idea of if the agent can be a witness or not. So we bring a case, right? If a person tells 3 people to go and betroth a woman, 1 is the agent and 2 are the witnesses. This is according to Beit Shammai. This seems to prove that the agent is not the witness, right? Because he separates them. Beit Hillel say they're actually all agents, and none of them can be witnesses. So it seems that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai both agree that the agent cannot be the witness. There is another source that says that Beit Shammai say if 2 people were sent, then 1 is the agent and both are witnesses. This seems to apply that Beit Shammai say that he can be the agent can be a witness, and Beit Hillel says with 3, 1 is the agent and 2 are the witnesses. And the Gemara tells us that the law is that the agent can be the witness. Again, it's the strongest witness because he's the one who actually did the act. Let's say a person tells 2 people, since this is what we were talking about, you tell 2 people, go and betroth this woman. They are both agents and witnesses. So that shows that it's okay. So too in divorce and in monetary cases. The Gemara explains that if you are paying back a loan and you send 2 people to go repay the loan, they are the agents and they can be the witnesses. In general, you don't need witnesses to say that you repaid a loan. Therefore, here it's okay to send these agents and they can be witnesses. But if the agents are partial, because, the Gemara says, but wait a minute, how could this work? The agents are, they have a stake in it, because if they say that they returned the money to the borrower, so then someone would have to take an oath. And if they say they paid it, so then they wouldn't have to take an oath. So it seems that they have vested interest here. So the Gemara explains that there's another oath that they could take, and therefore it is okay that they are agents and witnesses. A father, so we mentioned that the father can accept betrothal for his Na'ara daughter, right, between 12 and 12 and a half, and he can accept her get, right? And there's a machloket if only the father or also the daughter can accept it. So the Gemara tells us that for divorce, it brings her back to her father. He or she can accept it. Again, this is only if she is not an adult. If she's an adult, she does all of her accepting and doing. But if she is a ktana, if she is a na'ara or under, right? If she's under 12 and a half, then the father does it. So for betrothal, which removes her from her father, right? Only the father and not she herself can accept it. Again, she's she's younger than 12 and a half. Because she's going in divorce, because she's going back to her father's house, therefore he's okay with her accepting the get. But with Kiddushin, she's leaving his domain, his reshut. Therefore, only he can accept Kiddushin for her. But with Ma'amar, if you remember, Ma'amar is the betrothal of the Yavam, right? Remember, if a woman is married to a man and they don't have children and the husband dies, she needs to marry the brother, right? This is called Yibum. The beginning of that process is called Ma'amar. That's like betrothal, but in the Yibum process. So when the brother does Ma'amar, which is Kiddushin, betrothal to the girl, if she's a Na'ara, if she's between 12 and 12 and a half, she can accept it alone without her father's consent. Daf 44 tells us, therefore, what's the reason? Right, the reason is that Kiddushin, a betrothal, needs to be done with her consent. Remember, we learned that you cannot betroth the woman without her consent. Therefore, the father can accept it because he needs to ask her if this is what she wants. Because if it's not what she wants, he can do whatever he wants. It doesn't work. She has to consent. But for a get, which could be done against her will, therefore she or her father can accept it. With Ma'amar, if he does it against her will, what if the father accepts it against her will? Again, Ma'amar is when the Yavam, the brother, says he wants to betroth the widow, right? His deceased brother's wife. If he does it against her will, so then if the father accepts it against the girl's will, there's a machluket if it works, right? Meaning, Yibum could be done against her will. Of course, we learned in Masechet Yevamot that that's not done, but technically it could be done. So is it like Yibum, meaning is it like the marriage, and therefore the betrothal could be done against her will? Or is it like regular betrothal, like Kiddushin, which has to be done with her consent, and therefore it needs her consent? The Gemara tells us that Ma'amar is unique because she's already bound to the Yavam. If you remember, as soon as the brother dies, there's a relationship between her and the brother, right? It's called a zika, if you remember. Therefore, it's not like regular Kiddushin, and therefore, if the father accepts it without her knowledge, it could work. Okay, the next Mishnah will tell us, we didn't learn it yet, but it's quoted in our Gemara, that if a man says, be betrothed to me with this date, and he gives her a date, like the fruit, not the date, not calendar, right? He gives her a date, and he says, be betrothed to me, and then he gives her the date, and then he says it again, be betrothed to me with this date. So at least one of those dates needs to be worth a pruta. We see it as two separate statements, and therefore it needs to be of a certain value. Okay, and with this, the Gemara tells us that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon, who separates these statements, and he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda about agency. The law is that that there is a difference between divorce and betrothal for the girl to accept it or not, meaning the father can always do it. The question is, can the daughter do it as well? Can the father make the na'ara, meaning the daughter, an agent to accept her own get? Right now, again, he's the only one who can accept it. Can he make her the agent to accept it? Right? Is she like an extension of the father, and therefore she could accept it? Or no, that she's not like the father and can't accept it? So the Gemara says, yes, she can be an agent for her father to accept her own get. It seems a little complicated. So I agree, it is complicated. Now, the next question is, can she appoint another agent? The Gemara says, no, she does not have the ability, meaning she's not a strong enough agent to assign another agent. All right, if she doesn't have, let's say she doesn't have a father, she can appoint an agent, or even if she does have a father, even if she has a father, she can appoint another agent. That's another opinion. A ktana, right? So this was a na'ara between 12 and 12 and a half. However, a under 12-year-old, that's called a ktana, a minor, cannot appoint an agent. And again, as we said, the na'ara, if she has a father, she cannot appoint it. If she doesn't, then she can. The ktana, under 12, cannot accept Kiddushin. And if she does, without the consent of her father, what happens? The Gemara says she has to get a get, and she has to do miyun, right? Miyun was where she can just walk out of a relationship if that relationship was only a rabbinic marriage and not a biblical marriage. So what does this mean? So the Gemara explains she needs a get. Now, again, her father is alive. She accepted betrothal without his consent. Now, we don't know what the father wants. So the Gemara tells us you need a get in case the father would have consented to that marriage. And you need miyun, right? She has to do miyun, meaning she leaves the relationship if the father doesn't consent, because then it wasn't a biblical marriage. It was only a rabbinic marriage. And we don't want people to think that it was a real marriage and divorced. Or another opinion is you don't even need miyun because it was not a real marriage. Okay, last daf for today, daf 45. A father can only sell or betroth his daughter once. We learned this in the last chapter. If he, let's say, marries her off and then she's divorced or widowed, she does not go back to the father. The phrase in the Gemara is Yitoma b'chaye aviha, right? She's like an orphan whose father is still alive, meaning she does not go back to his domain. He does not have the right to sell her or betroth her to somebody else. He can only do it once. And therefore, if she gets married, she can do miyun, even though the father is still alive, because it's only a rabbinic marriage, because again, she is a minor. Okay, let's say the ktana, again, the under 12, accepts kiddushin, betrothal, without her father's knowledge, and then the husband died. So now she has to do yibum, but we don't know if she's really married. So she has to do miyun. She has to do miyun if the yavam, the brother, does ma'amar. So just to remind us, the yavam does ma'amar, that's his betrothal to her. She does miyun, which means she rejects him, and she needs a get, because maybe the father would agree again, maybe when the brother did ma'amar, this is really Kiddushin because the father didn't want her to marry the first brother, but wants her to marry the second one. So then she would need a get because then she would be really betrothed to the second one. She needs miyun because maybe the father didn't want her to be married at all. So then she just walks out. And she needs to do chalitza because maybe her father wanted her to be married to the first one, and therefore they need to do yibum, but she doesn't want to do yibum, so she does chalitza. If this is bringing up memories from Masechet Yevamot, you should. You're right. This is all from Yevamot, but it's an interesting perspective because now we're doing it from the perspective of the father and the girl having the ability to accept betrothal with or without his consent. Again, this is only in the case of her being a minor, right, and not having the ability to do it on her own. Okay, let's say he didn't do ma'amar. Again, the daughter, the minor girl, the girl under 12 accepts kiddushin from a man. Then he dies. This is all without her father's consent. And then the brother does not do ma'amar. So then she only needs to do chalitza, again, because maybe the father would have consented to the first marriage. The father, let's say the father is willing to marry off his daughter. The Gemara says that in general, a father is willing to marry off his daughter, right? We've seen that it is it's a business deal. It's anyway, it's the right that he has, but the son is picky. And therefore his father does not have the right to marry him off without his consent. Which is very interesting to see the difference between sons and daughters. Let's say the Gemara gives a case of a man who used these very cheap vegetables to betroth a minor in the shuk, meaning in the marketplace, without the father's consent. The Gemara says this is not valid because it was done in a degrading manner, right? Whether it's the fact that he gave her spoiled vegetables or he did it in public, either way, it does not matter, and it is not valid. The Gemara gives a story. There's a mother and a father, and they disagree whose relative is going to marry their daughter. Right? She wants her relatives to marry the daughter. He wants his relatives to marry the daughter. And eventually, right, they argue. Eventually, the mother wins the argument. The father agrees that the daughter can marry the mother's relatives. So they make a party. And the father's relative, like, sneaks up to the attic and betroths the girl in private. Again, the girl is a minor. The Gemara tells us this is invalid because even though we know that originally the father wanted her to marry his relative, because he concedes to the wife, we assume that the father would not consent to this marriage because he already agreed with his wife. Or because they already made this big party and he would not want the daughter married to somebody else. So it is invalid and the daughter marries the wife's relatives. A minor became betrothed to somebody who was a Kohen, a priest, with the consent of her father. Okay, so betrothal with consent. Then the father went off traveling on a business trip, and then she got married to the guy without the father being there. So now the Gemara asks, can she eat truma? One opinion is she can eat truma, right? Again, truma is because her husband is a Kohen, so the marriage is valid till the father comes back, because maybe he'll disagree about the wedding, or no, she can't eat truma till her father comes back and allows the wedding. The husband doesn't inherit, in this case with the Kohen, the husband doesn't inherit the minor's property if she dies because we don't know if the father consented to the marriage. What's interesting is that he already consented to the betrothal, so why he would not consent to the marriage is not clear to me. But I guess because he doesn't he didn't technically consent, it's as if there's no consent given. However, if the father knows about the marriage and didn't say anything, is it seen as consent? Right? In general, in halacha, in Jewish law, there's a phrase shtika kehoda'ah. Hodaya, right? Meaning, if I'm silent, right? If you say, "Do you want to go for ice cream?" and I don't say anything, the assumption is I agree with you. Because if I disagreed, I would have said, "No, I don't want to go for ice cream." So if I'm silent, it means I agree. So that's consent. Or maybe here the father knows about the marriage and he's so angry he doesn't have even any words to say. He's so mad about it. So again, if he's mad about it, she can't eat truma. If he consents, she can eat truma. Let's say she got betrothed and married without consent of the father. Again, we're talking about the minor, but the father is around, meaning he didn't go on a business trip. So then she can eat truma because again, he didn't protest. Or no, she can't eat truma because again, we don't know what he is thinking. With that, we finish for today. If you're tired, I don't blame you. And this was a very exciting week of daf. And I want to wish everyone first of all, Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach, Sukkot. It's very exciting. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will meet on a regular time next Wednesday. I wonder if I can do it from my sukkah. I don't know how my internet is, but maybe I'll start in my sukkah, but my internet's not so good, and then we'll come back inside. But really wishing everyone a wonderful holiday. I hope you enjoy and looking forward to our continued learning. So have a great night, everyone.
No questions, huh? No question?
Yeah, you